Hello and welcome to episode 288 of the Thursday Night Podcast. My name's Brady, joined as always by David. We are here in your feeds a day early because men's basketball and women's basketball, for that matter, play a day early. They are both playing on the Wednesday this week, but if we're honest, it was a 0 week for both basketball teams last week, so it's kind of in the spirit of also just moving things along. I think everyone involved is happy to move past the events of this past week, but we won't do that just yet because we're going to go through all the agonizing details of it on this podcast. Also touch on a couple bits of news in some other sports. Wanted to go right off the top. Not going to do as much as we did last week talking about this because, frankly, there wasn't as much to talk about with the actual Senior Bowl itself, but should just kind of put a coda on the Ted Hurst Senior Bowl conversation. Go back to last episode. We talked a long stretch about it and just kind of all the implications for him, what we're looking at as far as what he, the benchmarks for him going through this draft process, and then just also what already kind of making his name, what he's been able to do in the practice periods. He did not record a stat in the Senior Bowl itself. There was a lot of critiques of the quarterback play in the Senior Bowl, and I think it was a windy day too, so the passing game just kind of got neutered a little bit. But no kind of flashy thing that happened at the end of the week. But as we were talking about last time, he kind of did get the notoriety he needed, or notoriety all negative. He got the attention that he needed to get from the perspective he's coming in as a G5 guy, and that's still, you can put that in the bank moving forward. He has gotten the eyeballs of a lot of teams. I know from what tweets people are putting out, he spoke to some teams at the Senior Bowl, as one does as a prospect. And so all of that good news for Georgia State's latest and possibly best ever draft prospect.
Yeah, and the thing about the Senior Bowl is the game is kind of what it is. A lot of the scouts are more so looking at how are you doing in the one-on-one drills, and I think that's both fair and not fair, but I'm not a scout, so I think, like you said, the stuff that we needed to see from Ted, we kind of have already seen it, so now it's going to be about, how does he look at his pro day? Does he get an invite to the combine, which probably should? How does that go? And then from there, it's just, sitting for interviews and getting asked the weirdest and most random questions by a bunch of teams that I really, really hope that he is a high enough draft pick that we get to hear about some of them. Because I don't know about you, but some of the questions I've heard asked over the years have been yikes.
Yeah, I get they're going for a bit of how do they respond to something shocking, but some of it definitely feels like it toes past the line. Concern on this podcast, there are going to be some intra-fighting going on, because I think, as I mentioned last time, Falcons could use a receiver. I know, even though your New England Patriots are literally in Super Bowl week right now, I feel like as long as we have been talking about sports, you've always been like, you know what, the Patriots need a receiver. So you also, I'm sure, want him for the Patriots, and then gotta fight off. The Panthers need a guy to go with Ted McMillan. The Saints are looking to surround their anointed guy that they're actually sticking with in Tyler Shuck. Some scary possibilities for Falcons / Georgia State fans as far as where he could end up, because and then you add on Tampa Bay always gets receivers and develops them really well, so it's like you gotta watch out for some potential non-desirable outcomes for the dual fandoms of people listening to this podcast, but all good things in the end, because it means that he's getting a lot of attention as far as NFL draft circles go, and we'll continue to follow that as the rest of this transpires in the months ahead, because NFL draft season sometimes feels like it lasts longer than the actual NFL season, because people are putting out mocks in October and November, and now there's actually stuff happening, and so it is still not until very late in April that the draft actually happens. So a lot of runway still to go on all of that stuff.
As somebody who was looking at a draft, a mock draft every single week in the 2024 season, it 100% lasts. Will Campbell was there at 4, or early in the first round, from September before LSU season started until April. The draft process is so much longer than just the NFL season. It's honestly annoying.
Yeah, and less so now because we'll have something additional to talk about in April. Sometimes the content kind of dries up when there stops being so many sports happening. Gonna transition now to basketball. Again, I feel like the cliche of like we've delayed it long enough, but like I wish I could say it was entirely unsurprising, but I think the back of everyone's head it was kind of like how are they going to manage the road trip after winning 4 straight games? And the answer is Georgia State not up to the task on the road this week. The men's basketball team going 0-2, they lose 82-72 at Louisiana on Thursday night, and then fought back, erased nearly a 12-point deficit in the final 10 minutes against South Alabama on Saturday. Both games, like I said, was at 8. Very disorienting how late the Saturday game was, but they lose that one 69-67. It is the thing where like we'll get into it. Like there's reasons why it's not like hit the panic button. Like everything is still kind of in front of them, even from dropping 2 games. But it felt like you were looking for just the continuity of like they had got this run going, and Louisiana was a team that just when you looked at it on paper, even though it was going to be on the road, there was reasons to think the matchup was a winnable game. It was a game that you felt like it would be a symbol of they're taking the right step, they're continuing to put the foot down, and took a wrong turn. Obviously, the thing that jumps out, shot 31% as a team. It's not going to win you many basketball games. But if I'm honest, the common theme for me between both these games and the thing that was worse was it was just a bad week defensively. Just that's where it starts for me, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, I can't remember. I'm like trying to look at the schedule and, pull a rabbit out of my hat here. I can't remember when I said it, but I do remember earlier this year making a comment to the effect of, what if Georgia State is just a really bad road team and they can just take care of business at home? So not even considering the possibility of them being swept on the road here is probably my own fault. Because at the end of the day, some of the traits that we saw in some of their earlier games this year where they struggled to put points on the board, they struggled to play defense, those were things that we saw when they were on the road earlier this year. Like, we've seen this game, specifically out of Georgia State, several times this year, and they came on the road. And
many other times over the past 3 years before as well. Just kind of, you could just have the sense of, like, it is happening again as you're watching this game happen, because for whatever reason, we see kind of the same playbook happen with this team, especially as you're saying, in some of these road spots.
And it's very frustrating because you're right. They should not. I don't think they should panic. I mean, we outlined that there's still way more home games than road games. After this past week, they have 2 road games left, and then they go to Pensacola. So I understand, some sort of hesitance with them, especially because of how they looked in these games. It was the typical slow start, not being able to finish in either of them, despite some chances to kind of get back into specifically the South Alabama game. But it's kind of just par for the course when this team struggles. It's a lot of just throwing up shots, a lot of not making them, did great at the free throw line. Like, that's what they do, but it's so hard to win at any level when you're shooting 31% from the floor. It is a surprise that they even got to 72 points because of that. And, a lot of that is just based on the fact that they made 33 free throws, like I said, that is their bread and butter. It's kind of slump proof, if you will, for them. And I wish this was a game where I could sit there and say like, oh, they committed a ton of turnovers. Oh, the rebounding margin was so significant that it's a real problem. I mean, yeah, you don't want to get out rebounded by 7, but they won the turnover battle. It was just, they just played poor defense. It really felt like, the Raging Cajuns got what they wanted in a way that I don't think we've seen this type of team go against Georgia State
or this literal
dominate
team
them like that.
Entering last week, Louisiana had hit 50% or more in field goal percentage against 2 other teams all season, and then they did it twice this week because they did it again against Georgia Southern and won that game on Saturday. So there's a little bit of like solace in the fact that it wasn't like a one-off, that they had a good week at home. They also beat Georgia Southern, who's been above state in the standings all year, so it's like they've been capable of this, and they are not like winless in Sun Belt play. But in all of the likelihoods of like how this game was going to play out, even if you're going to say maybe Georgia State loses this one. Getting just beat to death and having them drop 82 on you was not in my high likelihood of possibilities. It just, the way that they have been playing this year, it's been, when they've had success, they beat South Alabama a few weeks back. It was 59-56 in Mobile. Like, they won a knockdown, drag out, and got a big shot to fall at the buzzer to win that one. It was not this brand of game where in the first half, like you said, they were just getting whatever they wanted. They were just beating Georgia State back in transition, or when they're going through the half court, just guys getting open, and they're shooting 9 of 18 from 3 in the game. A lot of that damage was in the first half, and it really felt over. Halftime, it was 48-28, then they took off the buzzer beater that wasn't from Louisiana that would have made it 48-28, so it's still an 18-point deficit, and at that point it's like, not only is this going to be the end of the losing streak, but like this is going to be an embarrassment. They did turn it on the second half some, in large part because, as you mentioned, in the second half alone, they were 25 of 27 from the free throw line. They were like in the bonus, like 6 minutes into the half or something. Like, they immediately got something going on offense they did not have in the first half, where it was just kind of like, get to the rim, get contacted, go make your shots, which, fair enough, this is something that they've done basically all year, that we know it's a strength of their game. With all of that, they got it to pretty close down the stretch. Too close, I'm sure, for comfort for Quantas White in Louisiana, because that game they were up by 26 right at the start of the second half. Got as close as 5. And all of that to say, it was in a half where Georgia State shot 27%, 21% from 3. If it's even like an okay, a mid shooting performance in the second half, they might have won that game. They might have erased a 26-point deficit. It was just that the defense was, especially in the first half, not good enough to get them to stay in the game. And then it was poor enough shooting in the second half that despite what they were doing to get to the foul line and make those shots, that just isn't going to get it done. They scored 44 points in a half basketball where they shot 27%. That in itself is a miracle. The second miracle would have been winning the game on top of that, and they weren't able to get that done. And it was a missed opportunity because you knew South Alabama was going to be a tough game on Saturday because they've been one of the better teams in the league this season. You knew specifically what they were going to do defensively was going to give you issues if you weren't going to bring your A game. And the thing of it is, I don't know if you have anything more to say on Louisiana. They actually did, I feel like it was a pretty good outcome for playing the zone South Alabama plays, just on the fact that they took 42 threes out of 60 shots, which is a pretty absurd ratio. I cannot tell you the last time that Georgia State's had a 3 to overall field goal ratio that skewed. Been a while. Maybe one of the Ron Hunter teams that have some of those good shooters. They shot 36% on the threes. They made 15 of 42. That's a lot, but they were living by the 3 and not dying by it. Especially, they got it going late in the game. They hit some to kind of really cut into the lead. They were 6 of 18 on shots inside the arc. I understand the way the South Alabama plays. It's kind of what they're asking you to do. And the line between a good shot Georgia State wanted in this game versus a bad shot that they were getting forced into is pretty thin. The margins are not they're pretty fine. But it's not about the denominator, the 18 field goals. It's just that you're not going to win many games if you're making 33% of your shots inside the arc. Those are supposed to be, those literally are the layups in a lot of cases. And it's always been an issue with these teams under Coach Hayes that they just haven't ever been particularly effective inside the arc and with some of the quote-unquote easier shots. And then when you contrast that to South Alabama making over 60% of their twos, that was just something the math they couldn't overcome in this game. Where it was a 2-point game in which they were outshot nearly 17 percentage points. I think it came down to the fact that just they took care of the shots. They got some good looks at the rim and were able to finish it, and Georgia State wasn't. And especially in the early second half when they started to build a lead, it was just kind of like they were getting exactly what they needed against Georgia State's defense going into the paint.
Yeah, and it's really tough because you shouldn't even have to put yourself in this position. You know, if that last three goes in and they were 16 of 42 instead of 15 of 42, you know, we're talking about a 38%, day from downtown. And we're also talking about a win. But that doesn't mean the process was good, And, I hate to, rag on him a little bit just because the last couple of games, he kind of showed everybody in the Sun Belt that what he could be. It was a really poor weekend from Jelani Hamilton, and specifically taken way too many threes for the inability to hit them. I mean, he was 3 of 19 this weekend, that is an incredibly difficult...
From 3, because he was 5 of 29 overall, which was a similarly just not very good percentage.
And it's very hard to live if you're taking those as layups, it's very hard to live with a 16% field goal percentage from 3 anywhere. Honestly, there's just nowhere where you can really be super playable like that. And so it's nice that at least in this game he was able to distribute a lot more, got some rebounds, definitely seemed like calling him a team player feels a little odd because it's not like he wasn't before, but he was able to contribute in other ways. But it is incredibly difficult when your, best player is shooting like that. Because it's not like other people didn't have solid games, Malachi Brown, all 7 of his shots were threes, that was a great performance. Trey Scott did that thing that he does, his first name. So it's frustrating to see that because I think they did shoot relatively well, and you just need that one more 3, and you could have come away with the split here.
Yeah, the week in general, not like Malachi showed a lot offensively. He really had his game going, and Jelani was a struggle. And when you're talking about this is a guy we've been saying, he wins Sun Belt Player of the Week. He's going to be in the conversation for making all Sun Belt first team. This is just what the standard gets raised to, where it's like he scored double digits in both these games, obviously getting to the line, especially against Louisiana, help with that. But it's like there's levels to this thing when you're trying to be that level of player, and it's just kind of visibly pressing and just kind of forcing some bad looks because you're trying to get your shots to fall. It's a bad habit to fall into, and in both of these games, there were stretches where it was hurting Georgia State, and they need Jelani to be maybe not the version of a guy who's scoring 38 every night because that's not a realistic ask, but he had been on a good roll of being pretty efficient. He'd been hitting his threes especially really well. He was nearing 40% for the season, which is obviously an elite number. That took a dip after these 2 games.
You could say that again.
But like that, it's more about just kind of like you want that to be your star. Like we tried to figure out as the season goes on. I mean, he's been leading in scoring much of the season as he's been playing. He obviously had this spell where he was not on the court in like November time, but I think we always had a feeling that he was probably like the guy you wanted to lean on most, but that had started to become more and more evident. And so in a weekend where you go 0-2, and yes, you only lost one of the game by 2 points, so it's not like you got blown out. You lost the other one by 10, not like you got blown out really in either game. When your leading scorer and the guy you kind of look to lead you has such a off week, it feels like a very significant factor in the way the games go. And so you almost wanted to find it a little sooner when he knows he doesn't have it, because you mentioned he's 6 assists, but he ended up taking 13 threes. If you remove him from the average, the percentage goes into the 40s as a team. Malachi was 7 of 16. Trey Scott hit both of his. Ja'Kai Newton hit 1 of 2. I guess kind of the rest of them not great percentages, but it's sort of just kind of just one of those weeks, I guess you could say. Just kind of fits the bill. It's like when he's having an off week like that, it almost makes sense that the team is going to lose both the games they play. But going back to what I started with, I just feel like the defense is what, like, it had been pretty consistent, and this week you just saw a total drop-off. So you kind of hope it's just kind of a blip, because this team has taken strides offensively, and in this game got back to their ways of shooting effectively, efficiently from 3. But it's not such a good offensive team that they can just carry it in that manner. They need to be able to getting stops, holding teams closer to 40 or below 40 shooting percentages and not north of 50 as they did in both of these games. Because even though the score doesn't look that bad, they only give up 69 points. Like that's on. If you were taking that as an average, you'd take that every day and twice on Sunday. But that was more of a function of how the game ended up playing down the stretch, where there was a lot of drawn-out possessions and wasn't going nearly the pace the game Thursday was or other games they've played in this stretch, where they've managed defensively better than in these two games. So it's just, I don't know what to make of it as far as how real this kind of drop-off in defense is, because we've seen a lot more evidence to the contrary in a positive way through a lot more of the games of the Sun Belt schedule, but we'll just have to see how they can respond, because obviously they got a big test coming up tomorrow. Today, so listening to this podcast, against Troy team who currently leads the league. So it's like you've got a chance to still kind of stop the slide, because Troy lost by 22 at home to App State. What that means is Georgia State's still only 2 games back of the conference leaders, which, that, you know, where they were in November, if you just said that without any other context, you'd have been like, yeah, I'm going to take that. But the issue is they could drop as low as, I think, 11th place, depending on other results this week. So it's like, and they only have 1 game. So it's the 1 game in conference they have is going to shape where they end up when the standings hit next week a lot more than other weeks, because you're usually playing these 2 conference games. So an interesting time to see how they're able to respond from this. 2 teams coming off of 2-game losing streaks in Georgia State and Troy. That is kind of your saving grace, is that it's an 0-2 week, and it's not, you're not in the worst space still, but at the same time, if you had gone even just 1-1, found out a way to beat a team against Louisiana that you should have on paper beaten, or found a way to fight back against South Alabama and stole a nice road win here despite going down 12 late, they would have been in a better place. They would have been a game closer to the top there, and they would have a lot more leeway when they're looking at the other teams lower than them in standings, which, you know, there's more than half this league is at or above 500. So you have a couple more 0-2 weeks, and you're going to really find yourself buried after you had been entering this week solo second place. So it's a time where they've got to just kind of get back to it and kind of leave last week, or they could suddenly find themselves in a totally foreign yet familiar place of being near the bottom of the league when they had a lot of in front of them not that long ago.
Yeah, and just one final thing on the South Alabama game. It's tough because you see the 69, but then you see that they allowed 50 paint points, you know? So you can't do that against Troy. You absolutely cannot do that against Troy. They're way too good, and I don't think, like, as a team, you know, they're not the most prolific three-point shooters, but they are still very good at it. And, you know, how Georgia State has made their bread and butter this year is forcing teams to have pretty poor shooting percentages, and finding ways for Georgia State to make their free throws. That's going to be the recipe. I mean, if you look at the 2 games that Troy played last week, that's kind of exactly how App State and James Madison did it, you know? So it's not rocket science. It's going to be the same, you know, formula for Georgia State, but it's just, you cannot allow this past weekend to impact you going forward here, because, you know, the Louisiana game was concerning in one way and the Troy game was concerning in a completely different way.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned the paints in the point. I'm glad you mentioned the points in the paint. English language's fault for having the similar words, and we use this. Whoever decided to make basketball use these words, it's like a interchangeable words thing. South Alabama, it's a size issue in the sense of, like, Georgia State has never really had that dominant inside presence, but it was Olsen for South Alabama who ends up 10 points. He got a couple of nice drives to the lane. Hit some threes as well. He's 6'8". It was Chase Harris, 6 of 11, 15 points to lead the Jaguars in the win. He's 6'6". This was not a case of, like, they were throwing the pass down low to a big guy that Georgia State didn't have the size to match. They're playing Trey Scott plays 24 minutes in this one. Christian Beam, who had come back after kind of disappearing after we thought he'd looked really good against App State and Marshall, he plays 10 minutes. So there were certainly moments in this game where they had the distinct size advantage on paper, and yet South Alabama has 50 paint points. So something's got to get reworked there because it was getting a little too easy, and even when Georgia State was going zone to kind of try and find answers there, was not getting them any kind of success. They were still giving up some pretty easy looks down low, and some of it's credit South Alabama that they were making some crafty shots happen, but that would be a concern because you start putting that on tape a bunch, even if you're throwing big bodies out there and it's like they are susceptible in this way, then this week is going to be kind of a forebearer of things to come because you're just going to keep seeing that again. Troy, I mentioned, coming in off a 2-game losing streak as they will head to Atlanta, or they're already in Atlanta. Wednesday night, they are 8-3 in Sun Belt play. So even with those 2 losses, they're still in first place. They're 15-8 on the season. Coached by one of, I think, as long as this podcast has been around, we have been big Scott Cross respecters. And he has really got that thing humming. Obviously, they make the tournament last year on the basis of what we've seen from the league so far. One of the favorites to do that again and repeat here in the 2026 tournament. But you're kind of hoping the blueprint is what you saw in these last couple games. As James Madison beats them at home, App beats them by a big margin, and Troy only scores 44 points. These 2 games, they scored 64 and 44, and they had been 80-plus each of the last 5 games before that. And so this is one where I think the defense is especially going to matter, as I was just laying out, because either you're going to hold them in the 40s and it's going to be like just an uncharacteristic bad performance for Troy, or they're probably going to be able to try and push the tempo, try and score some. And I guess the thing is they're not really, like, you look at the percentages, obviously they're scoring 83 points a game on average, so that is a great number, but they aren't really elite in any one area. They just do everything at least pretty well. And that is not a slight, because there's a lot of teams that do something really well, but are below average enough areas that it makes them not that good of a basketball team. And I think that Troy is a good team because they're just really well balanced. Not bad shooting it inside, not shooting it bad outside. Turn teams over some, but not like an elite level, but they also don't turn the ball over themselves a whole lot either. And so a big challenge awaiting them on Wednesday, and with it being their only Sun Belt game this week as they then host Northern Illinois for the MAC Sun Belt Challenge of the weekend, it's kind of magnified. It's kind of a one-off home game and the start of where you're going to finish a lot of your games this season at home, but almost makes it more important that this is the one you got to get. And it's going to be a challenge if we see similar performances to what we saw last week. I guess on the same side of things, if Troy looks the same as they did last week, then this will be a challenge for them as well. So going to be like who gets off the mat Wednesday.
And I mean, as much as we're talking about, Georgia State, road games, Troy's going to want to bounce back too. Like they lost at home, so it's a little bit different. They're still a pretty good road team, but it's not like this is going to be just an easy game for Georgia State. I mean, they are the Sun Belt leaders for a reason.
Yeah, and I guess numbers to that effect. They're number 1 offensive efficiency team in Sun Belt play. They are number 3 in 2-point makes and number 4 in 3-point percentage. And all of that to say, it's kind of the same running it back as what we were saying about the Arkansas State game, where you can't start slow. It cost you against Louisiana in ways it had not, even though you had started kind of similarly a little off the pace against like Southern Miss at home, Arkansas State at home. You managed in those one. You overcame double-digit deficits. In fact, at one point against Louisiana, it was the same deficit they were down to Southern Miss to the number. They were down 27-16 at some point in the first half in that one, and it only built from there. Whereas against Southern Miss, they were able to start climbing back into the game from that point. This is another one that it's too good of a team. They went into Viejas Arena, played an absolute crazy basketball game against San Diego State earlier in the non-con, and they won that game in I'm trying to get the numbers right. This one was double overtime. It was 108-107. And I say that because they have played an overtime game this season. They've played 3 double overtime games, and they played a triple overtime game, which they lost by 1 to USC back on November 20th. So Troy basketball has played some entertaining games, and they put up a lot of points. Obviously, I think multiple overtime games and going into the hundreds in those 2 games back-to-back against San Diego State and USC, contributing to their overall scoring numbers. But it's a good team, well-coached, and I don't believe Georgia State's beaten them in the Convocation Center. Another one of these teams that just kind of has had Georgia State's number as they've been kind of on the downslide, and a team like Troy's been rising up. So an opportunity to right that wrong, and you're kind of at the point in the season where you need it. It's like, especially with the way last week went, you need it. And then kind of hard to like stakes up Saturday because as we're now a few years into this MAC thing, I don't mind it, especially because it gives you a nice guaranteed D1 game at home for your non-conference. But it is kind of weird to just kind of slide this in at the point of the season, especially because given where GSU has been in the net, it's not like it's a great resume game or an interesting game. NIU is 7-14, 3-7 in the MAC, which also to say, Georgia State probably not looking like a super fun trip that they have to add on to their schedule. So it's not like Georgia State's some fine catch either. But this is not like a team that's like ULM level bad when you look at the numbers, but it is a team that has struggled this year. They're giving up over 76 points a game on average. They are allowing opponents to shoot 47%. They're getting out rebounded by about 4 a game. Commit a lot of turnovers. Over 15 a game. So it's a team that has some traits that are pick-outable that you can take advantage of, but we were saying similar things last week about Louisiana game, and they did not do it in that one. So it's like, it isn't a given they're going to be able to, and especially whatever the result of the Troy game is, if that's 3 straight losses, kind of how you approach that next game, that would be where I'd be a little bit of danger zone territory of like, is this team going to rebound after the rebound now that they have fallen back off again? So in a lot of ways, it's an opportunity, especially because you win, it's great. Chance to not go winless in the MAC Sunbelt Challenge, but also it is a break in the sense of it isn't nearly as, there's no conference stakes involved, which probably not a bad thing to get one of those games mixed in at this point in the season, even if it's a little weird. Ultimately, can't be a winless week we're talking about next week's episode. Just, that one feels like one.
I don't think Georgia State's lost in the Sunbelt MAC Challenge.
Until this year, the Eastern Michigan opener.
Yeah, sorry, yes.
Yeah, no, it was, they had been running the table.
Yeah.
And now
they've got to find a way to keep, obviously they lost to Eastern Michigan, but, that's annoying. Eastern Michigan has not kept up their end of the bargain.
Yeah, who could have seen that coming?
Yeah, I mean, everything you're saying is correct. I think these games are so odd because it's really hard to peg them. They might be close to each other in the net, but it's like, what's the biggest Sunbelt road trip? Northern Illinois is probably going a little bit further than that, or it's comparable, so I think
it's Texas tough. State.
Yeah, something like Texas State to like the Virginia schools, maybe?
I think those are longer, but this isn't. I think it's like a little bit. I mean, it's in your state, so I guess you'd know better than me.
I think it's because like Chicago to Atlanta is about 700-ish miles, like 750, 780, depending on traffic and which side streets you get off of. But like coming from how do you say it in Georgia? It's the cab in Georgia, correct? So it's the Kalb up here, which is annoying. Coming from there, it's like that's like an hour and a half extra. So you're looking at over 800 miles ish.
Presumably they're flying.
Yeah, presumably. But just as a point of comparison, it's a long road trip.
If they are busing, you better win this game. If they're busing from DeKalb.
You're right.
And this thing works out better in the years where you were the home team in February than when you're the home team because it'd be such a chore to be making this trip, and I'm sure it feels like a bit of a chore for them making this trip in the middle, like after a midweek game, they're gassing up the jet going down to Atlanta. it is also, let's not forget, a revenge spot. And IU came to the Convocation Center in November 2023 as part of the MCE. Georgia State hosted, won that game, led by then Huskies star Zarik Nutter, who was their leading scorer that day. So not only is it not going winless in MAC SBC play for the first time ever, got to get them back after they came to your building a couple years ago, got the job done. 2 games this week, one of them not in the league, but just we'll see how they can respond to some adversity. After they responded well to some adversity a couple months earlier in the season, we'll see if they can do the trick again and kind of get this thing going back in the right direction, as they have a semi-favorable end of the season as far as the way the schedule lines up. So this is, I think when you were looking at it like a couple weeks ago, this was where you're going to forecast some stormy weather. And it's just going to be about how they managed what has happened and move forward from that, because there is still a lot that they can play for and they can make happen for themselves despite how the season started. And that's what they're going to have to start making count this week and make last week a blip. There's no joy to be found turning to the women's team either, as they also went winless last week, but they were at home, so I guess that makes it a little bit more discouraging. They lose 69-61 Arkansas State in a game that you'd taken that final score. Yeah, but we talked about that was going to be a tough matchup.
The worst week of the two of them, if I can be honest with you.
Oh, yeah, I think that's totally fair, because we'll start with the earlier game. Obviously, they lose 69-61 Arkansas State in the midweek. They were up 23-15 after one quarter, where it's like, all right, maybe they're doing the same thing they've been doing in some of these marquee matchups at home where they're able to get teams. They get JMU earlier in the year. Arkansas State wins the second quarter 26-7, takes an 11-point halftime lead, and from there, that was kind of it done and dusted, and so you lose that opportunity. Then on Saturday, kind of the second half got you, where you're up 52-45 going into the final quarter, and a nightmare 10 minutes unfold. 68-59 final in favor of the Texas State Bobcats, as you're outscored 23-7 in the fourth quarter of that one. And so finishing 0 for your last 14 on field goals, shooting 1 of 16 and 1 of 5 from 3 in the fourth quarter. You really, like, it's the textbook, the dictionary definition of giving a game away there, where it was in your grasp, unable to get the job done, and as a result, leaves them 9-14, 4-7 in league play. And now, should they find a way to level it back with Texas State, who's now 6-5 in conference play, because it's the only game they're playing, they've got that tiebreaker. And so I mentioned last week that might matter. I guess Georgia State hopes it matters because they like to get back even with Texas State in the standings. But if it does, if they are able to, then they will lose the tiebreaker and drop a seed line from there. So if they're able to even turn it around, could still be a significant result when all is said and done.
Yeah, and I mean, it just sucks because what am I going to say about these two games, Brady? You know, it's we're kind of spinning our wheels a little bit. It's rebounding. It's a lack of a viable second option for Crystal Henderson.
And it is one bad stretch of 10 minutes in each of these games.
Exactly. And we had kind of stopped seeing that specific issue. But you really felt good, specifically about the Texas State game. You really felt good going to the fourth quarter. There wasn't a quarter where it felt like a true disaster class. I mean, even going into halftime, Georgia State, outscored the Bobcats by 10 going into halftime. And, you really felt good about that one. And then it just kind of all fell apart in the fourth in a way that made no sense, compared to the rest of the game. And it's very frustrating, I mean, they made one bucket from the floor in the fourth quarter. Like, that's you can't win basketball games when you do that. It's really hard to do that, at least. And it's frustrating because it's like I don't want to take away from the rest of the game because they did so well, in my opinion, but you can't shoot 1 for 16 in a quarter. Sometimes that's just sequencing, sometimes that's just bad luck and stuff like that, but it just is kind of emblematic of a problem we saw earlier in the season where, the second period in the half, whether it be the second quarter or the fourth quarter, they would just kind of disappear, and they would disappear for the entirety of the quarter. It's not like the men where it's like, okay, you might go on a 5-6 minute scoring drought, but then you still find a way to do something, I mean, they made 1 3. That was their one field goal in the fourth quarter, 1 3, and then they shot 4 free throws and made them. That was it. That you can't live like that. You know what I mean? So it's tough to really take too much away from this because of something like that. You were doubled up on rebounds. Got out rebounded 46-34 for the entire game. Like, that's for the women. That's it. Unfortunately, with how things go and how they need to win, that margin right there is huge for them. I should say, sorry.
Yeah, and it wasn't that, like, the third quarter numbers they're 5 of 15, so it was trending down as they get outscored by 3 in the third quarter to kind of cut into their deficit. But fourth quarter really got away for them. That second quarter against Arkansas State, they were 2 of 15, 0 of 8 from 3 with 10 turnovers, whereas the Red Wolves went 10 of 15, 4 of 7 from 3, and then only had 3 turnovers themselves. And so, sort of unfortunate, just kind of, you see the progress from this team, and then they kind of have these nightmare moments where games get away from them. And this one in particular feels like the wrong kind of emblematic, just because it just feels like it's a team that's been stuck kind of in neutral a lot of the season, just not be able to take advantage enough of the things they do well and not able to avoid kind of their worst habits cropping up at the worst possible times, and having just kind of these nightmare quarters where things get away from them. And in this case, literally it flips their lead into a deficit. They lose the game by 9. Not even really seeing it out in the final. They've had the heroics we've talked about the last couple of episodes where Crystal Henderson has made some plays happen, but because of how the offense totally dried up, you played yourself out of a situation where you could get that last minute shot. You 3 at the buzzer here makes it a 6-point final score, not a 9-point final score. It's like you had gone from a position where you really, as long as you didn't make too many mistakes, could have protected a 7-point lead without any extended scoring drought, without playing a phenomenal quarter, but just playing out a poor one. And unfortunately, that was not the case for the women's team. On Saturday, they drop both games this week, and they also only have one conference game, but unlike the men, they're not in the Max Sun Belt Challenge, so they don't have a weekend game. They're just playing in the midweek. They go to ULM on Wednesday at 7:30. The Warhawks are 9-12, 4-8, a half game behind Georgia State in the standings. So again, no, I'm going to say it's another significant seed implications game, but also getting the chance. I mean, we saw what happened when they hosted JMU as the only game that week back in January. It does feel like a moment where having just the one game to kind of center back in on and focus, and just you're making a business trip here. You got to get on the road and get back into winning ways. Maybe not the worst thing, but this is going to be a team that it's a winnable game, but they're 7-4 at home. Georgia State's 3-9 on the road this season, so you certainly don't look at it and assume anything. But I have no trouble assuming that it's one they're going to need in their back pocket as they're trying to improve the way the season's gone and try and get in the best place possible going into Pensacola.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure how they're going to find a way against ULM. This isn't a team that puts up a ton of points. They shoot okay. They're definitely lower on in the Sun Belt in terms of 3-point shooting. They turn the ball over a lot. Almost 20 turnovers a game. That is a lot of turnovers. You absolutely have to take advantage of that. But also, is this going to be a team that, they pull down about 40 boards a game, a little under 40 boards a game? Is this going to be a Georgia State team that is going to allow them to, shoot up in their, rebounding totals? We've seen that with other teams that Georgia State has played this year, where it has not mattered a single bit when it comes to, pulling down rebounds. So I'm not I'm not 100% sure, how Georgia State's going to do in this, and I wish that we could kind of definitively say that they'd be a little bit better, because the traits here lead me to believe that Georgia State is capable of winning this game, even though it's on the road. Their road performance isn't nearly as bad as the men, but it's still not as good. They're about the same now after this past couple of weeks. A loss here would tie their record, so... I just feel like the mojo is kind of gone right now. They just kind of need to get back to playing some better defense and, keep the offense going consistent. There was a couple week stretch where they were at least pushing the 70s. Obviously against Troy last week, they had 69 points. But it's like they haven't really been threatening the 70s of late, and they need to be doing that more.
One game to watch there, 2 games on the men's side is... a lot of similar kind of talking points there through that conversation for both the teams. Is kind of, this is an important week for both to kind of get a reset. Obviously, last week was not up to their expectations, and maybe not in as advantageous a potential spot for the women's team, as they're 4-7 in league play. So they're really fighting to just kind of get back to the middle of the pack, rather than the men's team, who is in the middle of the pack trying to make sure they don't get dropped down any further. But this is their chance this week, and the one game to kind of hone in on and try and go 1-0 this week in the literal sense, not just the way that every coach always says, one game, you go 1-0 today, or whatever the case may be. We'll cover all the basketball results on next week's episode. Gonna run us out here with a couple of just didn't have anywhere better to put it news items just to mention. Baseball will be back next week, and we'll be digging in a lot more in the next week. And next week's episode is we're going to get a real preview of the season and their opening series as they host New Orleans next weekend. But did want to mention, we learned today that 3 games for Sunbelt Baseball have been elevated to ESPN national TV games, all of them involving the Coastal Carolina Chanticleers. Reason I am mentioning this on this episode is Georgia State's going to play in one of them. On April 18th, they will be in a game at Coastal Carolina that's going to get broadcast on ESPNU. And so baseball is the thing where it's like Coastal Carolina is the class of this conference, one of the better programs in the sport. And so it's a blessing and a curse maybe to get put on national TV there against what we know is a very good team. But baseball's weird. Maybe they win that game 15-2 because it's just like that's the way baseball goes, and it could be a nice little moment for the baseball program in a national TV spot. So I guess we'll find out soon enough if that pays off for them in the long run. But we were talking about this before we hit record. There are not been very many Georgia State national TV spots. You were thinking maybe one of the ones maybe against Clemson, South Carolina a couple years back got kind of put up on national TV, but it has not been very often. So you really can't take these opportunities for granted, as far as like it is your team on national TV is kind of the aim of the game. And so even though they're doing it as a pretext to talk about Coastal Carolina for what they are and what they mean to the sport of college baseball, Georgia State's benefiting from that in their own way.
Yeah, I mean, any eyes, we talk about it with football, any eyes that you can get on your team and your program, as long as you find a way to put up a good performance, that's usually a good thing. So hopefully Georgia State can do that.
Like I say, a lot more to come on baseball in the coming weeks. But the last thing to mention, it's not really like it's news, but it's kind of been brewing for a little while now. Officially put out there today from sources by Chris Hummer, Matt Zenitz at 247 CBS Sports, that Georgia State football is promoting Casey Roddick to offensive line coach. He was an O-line analyst last season, and he was a GA back in 2024. He was an all-ACC guard for Florida State in 2023. He was one of the big recruiters who brought in Maxwell Robinson, the 4-star kid from Kansas. And so after they moved on from Bryant Ross ends up at South Alabama as the O-line coach there, staying in the conference. An internal replacement and not like a big grabby name, but I have kind of always believed that like they've made the choice to move on from back-to-back offensive line coaches, but like that hasn't really been that coach's problem necessarily. So it's a new voice. It's another up-and-comer that you've had in the building for a couple years that obviously Coach McGee likes And someone's already started to deliver on the recruiting side. But getting this news officially that seals the staff, and I think we're expecting kind of a full lid on the recruiting class to come in pretty soon, as the old National Signing Day, that was the only day now, the second National Signing Day is pending. And so we'll also touch on that in the podcasts to come. But Georgia State got a complete shelf again as far as the coaching staff goes, and I think a lot of reasons that this makes sense. And it's also, the offensive line's been in such a spot that you need to just kind of see it before it's like you're ready to feel any kind of way about it. It's kind of like, it is what it is, and it's a new voice. And welcome, congrats to Coach Roddick for his first full-time gig in college football.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is some reason to be cautiously excited about Georgia State going into the fall. We'll see how the signing class and the recruiting class just really solidifies. But, I mean, I think there is a version of Georgia State that takes, some steps forward in ways that we kind of expected them to take in 2025. So hopefully they can actually do that.
And, I mean, not to end in another tangent, but, this is still a net much more experienced staff with the moves you made across the board, and each of the last two offensive line coaches you moved on from after a season had been in their first full-time gig as well. So it's not like this is like you're replacing a 20-year vet in the profession with a guy who's in his first gig. You're kind of just trying another voice in the room, and it's another one that you think is going to be a future star in the business, obviously, otherwise you wouldn't give him a job at this point in his career. And you need some of those coaches to hit just as you're building a staff, especially at this level. You don't have infinite money to give everyone their biggest asking price. And so I'm not saying they're doing this as like a Moneyball thing where they had to save, it's like cheaping out, so to say, but there is a certain reality of when you're setting a budget that you're going to have guys that make less than some of the guys that are the coordinators are making more. And there is a certain balance you have to strike there, where I don't think the issue in the last couple of years has been that they have just taken these wild swings that haven't worked and that they're going too far in that direction. But I think especially on the defensive side, they needed to add some experience, which they're able to do. And the rest of it is you're going, these coaches who are starting out need to get position coaches so they can be the 20-year vets 20 years from now, or the coordinators 10 years from now. It's like, you do still have to grease the wheels and let the profession keep growing. And so G5 spots, I think, especially now, can be a unique spot for seeing these guys really develop, because with the money involved with these buyouts, with these big coaching staffs, at the power conference level, I'm sure there's some skittishness where it's like, yeah, you might like this guy who's an analyst on your staff, but you don't know if you want him to be on your full-time recruiter for you, because there's a lot at stake here. And so I think the G5 taking on a greater role as being the introductory, and even the FCS level, where guys really start, I guess it's been happening, and a lot of these coaches who are head coaches now probably started this level or below, but it feels more magnified now, just because of the way the sport is and how everything at the top feels so tight, and a lot at stake, a lot of stressful jobs.
Yeah, it's rare you see a lot of people learn of these coaches when they're at this level, and I think that's one thing that I appreciate, a podcast like this, or just people who care about the G5, because we talk about the players kind of developing and stuff like that, and sometimes that can make fans upset when you say that they're a minor leagues for the Power Four or whatever. But the coaches do the same thing in a way. They're also trying to develop. There is something to be said about putting a headset on and being like, all right, this is my first, coordinator job, or this is my first position group, job. And that's going to take the lessons that I learned here, regardless of talent, is what I take when I go to my next spot. And, we talked about it last week with Dan Ellington. he's kind of doing the coaching all the different positions right now, and it wouldn't shock you or I in a couple of years if we see somebody somewhere being like, yeah, this guy, he was a former quarterback at Georgia State. Let's have him be our our offensive coordinator. Like he's coached all these different groups. He's been the running backs coach, he's been the tight ends coach, wide receivers coach at these different spots, and here's how these players did. So I think this is a good thing, when you're talking about this type of position, this type of hire. If this was like a, offensive coordinator position, maybe wide receiver, and there were 2 Ted Hursts or something going into this year that Georgia State had, then yeah, I could understand wanting, a specific type of experience. But, sometimes it's okay to roll the dice.
Also, speaking to just, he was an all-conference player he was playing college football in 2023. There's a clip of him, quote, flinging Harold Perkins Jr. of LSU in that game that they played in Orlando in 2023 to start the season. Just so to speak of, this is a young guy, he's playing, there's a clip of him against someone who is currently going through the draft process in the 2026 draft. So not unlike Dan, where he was into the job immediately after he finished as Georgia State's quarterback. This is another guy that has not been on the coaching side very long. He was playing not that long ago, but he's playing for the 2023 FSU. I mean, obviously, the story didn't end the way they wanted it to, but that was a good football team that he was a good player for. Interested to see what it looks like. Obviously, going to keep tracking all that stuff on the roster side as that finishes up, and we'll get to that and much more with the basketball and the baseball as baseball starts next week on the next episode of the Thursday Night Podcast. Thank you for listening to this one. We will catch you next time.